Welcome in episode 338 of the Source State Podcast, your go-to Kentucky basketball and recruiting podcast on the growing KSR Podcast Network. I am your host, Jack Pilgrim of Kentucky Sports Radio. Very excited to be joined once again by the one and only Sean Smith of Go Big Blue Country. Sean, how the heck are you?
I'm fantastic. We can actually talk about Jaxson Robinson being a Kentucky Wildcat, made it through the deadline, beyond the deadline, and then we get it yesterday afternoon, Jack, and it's after 2 hours and 16 minutes of not being able to talk about it and just kind of speculating about whether or not what it would look like with him and without him. We now can talk about what it's going to look like with him, and honestly a huge sigh of relief, but a big time win for Mark Pope, and one that he had to work for too.
I can't get over what that night was and how we got to the final destination that included debating what Pat Kelsey's weight is, whether we could bench press him or use him as dumbbells, whether SpaghettiOs was a soup or not, what we would be going to prison for, and ending with the worst game of rock, paper, scissors of all time. Like I've never been a part of something so dumb and ridiculous, but like just beautiful, stupid chaos in my life. Because you just expected news to drop before that midnight deadline. We've been there before. We did the show last year, and there was still news popping out throughout the show that we were like, okay, the odds are pretty darn good. Something has to happen, whether he's keeping his name in or pulling out. We got to figure out something. So when that midnight struck, we were like, okay, 12:05, 12:07, 12:10, 12:15, 12:30. All right, there's not going to be an announcement tonight. So it just got, it just got weird very quickly. And we appreciate everybody for got good feedback on it, actually, just letting us be our normal dumb selves. So you know what? Maybe we'll just continue to be ridiculous with some of our shows. We've been ridiculous in the past, but that was like a whole different stratosphere of ridiculousness. So I appreciate the patience for people that was a little new for them. Our audience has grown a lot since we've kind of been slap happy and dumb in the past, where I'm sure it was just new for a lot of our newer listeners. So thank you for the patience. I'm sorry if you hated every second of it, but hey, feedback was overall pretty solid.
It's more enjoyable now, though, that you can look back on that episode and you got what you wanted. You get Jaxson Robinson, and we kind of passed the time of maybe some frustration that night where people were waiting around on whether or not he was going to be there. Me and you have had moments like that before. We just hadn't had it on a platform of a live recording. Like, you've gone back and forth and done some funny stuff and had funny conversations. This is the first time the whole world got to see him. But boy, that was a blast. Even happier today that we can start talking about some things over the next few weeks about what this roster, not what it's going to look like, but what it actually looks like and what rotations could look like. This was a big one, Jack. Not that Kentucky needed a dude, and I don't want to label him the dude. We've talked about that the last few weeks. But it's a guy that's entering your program that has some familiarity with the coach, that the coaching staff has actually seen with their own two eyes in that system. That's the difference maker in this, is it's not all a mystery entering October. At least you got something to build around and some continuity with Mark Pope.
Well, yeah, let's dig into the nuts and bolts of that. 14.2 points per game last season on 43, 35, 91-ish splits. 6'7" wing, 6th man of the year in the Big 12, really broke through after a solid first season in BYU, bounced around Texas A&M, Arkansas, broke through a little bit. His first year at BYU found some continuity and some comfort there out in Provo, and then exploded this past season, became, as you said, not the dude, but a dude on a really good team. Again, this was a team that finished 5th in the Big 12, their first year in the Big 12, taking on a brand new level of competition, something that Mark Pope had never experienced before, coming from Utah Valley, going to BYU. The conference talent just wasn't there. So for them to accomplish what they did, he was a Big 12 Coach of the Year contender for much of the season. didn't reach the heights that they expected, lost in the first round, to Duquesne, an 11 seed Duquesne. So it wasn't a perfect run, but it was as impressive of a year one in the Big 12 as you could possibly ask for Mark Pope in the BYU program. And Jaxson Robinson was the catalyst for a lot of that. He was the guy that hit the big shots, that you kind of ran the plays through, that, could score at all three levels, was pretty much a pure catch and shoot specialist in year one, and really did kind of emerge as a 3-level scorer. I really kind of equate it to Antonio Reeves' growth, where he was known as just a guy, just pure knockdown shot specialist. But this was a guy that just kind of started tinkering and figuring out new ways to score and get to his spots and, be the best version of a guy that in a system scored in every single which way, where you could put him in different spots and say, we trust you to hit that shot. We trust you to score on the basket. But again, the system is what it is, and it's going to carry a lot of the weight. It's an ultimate safety net, but no offense is perfect. Defense is oftentimes very, very good. At the high major level, in the SEC especially, you're going to come across elite individual defenders and elite team defenses where you're going to be put in a position where with 6 seconds left on the shot clock, you're going to have somebody who can do it. Not that he is going to just Xavier wheel it and dribble the air out of the ball until the end of the shot clock, but does have the ability to kind of break off, and when you can't run an offense left with 5 seconds left on the shot clock, where you can trust him to go get you a bucket. Jaxson is capable of doing that. He's a system player, but he's also an individual talent. That is why NBA scouts loved him and said, you're a draftable guy, whether he's going to get an early second round guarantee or whether, he might have to do the two-way thing. But he was a pro. He's a pro bucket getter at all three levels. So that is why I love this edition. You had a lot of system guys up to this point, but you didn't really have a guy who you could lean on as the safety net scorer when the offense wasn't just firing on all cylinders. That's why Mark Pope needed Jaxson Robinson, and there's a reason why he pushed so hard for him up to this point.
Yeah, big time get, and he's going to be able to do a lot of the things that he did in that system at BYU. Can you be even more efficient in a year at Kentucky around some other guys too? Like, we've talked about this, like Mark Pope's rosters and what he built at BYU, they were good. They were really good offensively. But when you get to Kentucky, you can have some more talented guys. Now, obviously, this roster isn't loaded with guys that are going to show up on NBA draft boards for next year, but it's still proven college basketball talent that's had a lot of success. Here comes Jaxson Robinson into the mix, Jack. Now, a year ago, and I'm going to be interested to see what roles are. Like, is this a starting role, or is this, because there's going to be a lot of talk about rotation over the coming months about where these guys slide. And if you've had a guy that's maybe played a role for you in the past, maybe he's okay playing that same role at a new place like Kentucky because he was so successful in the last one. But when you look at the numbers, let's just go off last year. Not as much career, 42% from the field. I want to see that go up, and I think it can. 3-point percentage, 35%. Like, that's beyond playable. Can that climb a little bit too? Like, he took 229 attempts. Does he get to that number on this team? I don't know. They take a lot of threes, but Kentucky's got plenty of guys that can not only take them, Jack, but they can hit them too. Here's a big one. Almost 91% from the free throw line a season ago. Like, that's a big number. That's super impressive. So that was on 65 attempts. He hit 59 of them. That's a guy that can cash in if he gets there. So I want to see, obviously, when we get into this thing in the fall, is he taking the same number of shots that he took at BYU? I don't think that number is going to go up. I don't think it's going to dip significantly, especially early on. But when you look at this, he's another guy that fits the system he's got some familiarity with and thrived in, but the pieces around him fit as well. And I think that it's just it's a match made in heaven when you get it together. And I don't know how much buzz this is going to generate over the next few months about what Kentucky can be, because I still see people putting them in that middle tier of SEC teams next year, because the SEC is going to be loaded. We know that. Alabama at the top there, Tennessee, everybody else is going to be good too. Where does Kentucky fall? They certainly have a chance to climb that upper tier more just because he's on the roster than what they would have if he hadn't been.
And that's the best point, because I don't think the difference matters between 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 to 25. Getting in the conversation was important because you could believe in that 11-man group to be competitive, to win basketball games, to have enough substance there to where you have the shot making with Kobe Bryant, you have the play making with Kirk Creasy, you have the defense with Lamont Butler and Otega Oweh, Amari Williams down low. You have shot making with Andrew Carr. Like, you had the individual pieces, but it just didn't have the top end talent to where you could say, okay, could they, come together down the stretch and win games, making tough baskets when things get tight? Who is going to be the guy to kind of elevate them and push them over the top? That guy just didn't exist. So that's why you saw them left off of a lot of the top 25 boards, where they're like, we like the roster, but we don't love it. But I think fans and just national talking heads in general, just look at what the BYU roster construction was last season in the Big 12, in the way they won games last year, won big games. And you can go position by position and see that Pope upgraded every single position after already being successful in a one of the top conferences in college basketball. So for him to do what he did last season with a weaker roster overall leads you to believe that, okay, if they were a finish as a top 20 team in KenPom last season at BYU with that roster, why can't they be a top 15, top 12, top 10-ish roster as previously, as currently constructed, obviously, but they were already showing signs of being a better all-around roster, but it just needed that one little kick in the butt to make people believe that they could be, okay, well, if, Jaxson Robinson was the catalyst for a lot of that, you at least needed Jaxson Robinson comparison guy, and then you ended up getting him anyway. So I think that is going to, it adds national credibility by adding Jaxson Robinson.
It does. And I was thinking this morning when it comes to this roster and where they're going to fall in expectations. And, last year we went into that season with Kentucky kind of in the middle of the top 25, and we talked about how much we liked it because it was something different. Expectations weren't as high. Well, it didn't take long for them to kind of go beyond that. Now, the ending wasn't what everybody wanted, but I'll say this. If John Calipari were on the sidelines with this roster, they would be ranked higher. I fully believe that. Even if you kept the names the same and you just put John Calipari on there, because there were teams he had at Kentucky in the back half that had more question marks than this one did that were still slotted in the top 12, top 13 of the preseason, given off of the history of what had been done. And I know obviously there was some NBA guys in the mix. This is still a team, Jack, that I think that Mark Pope, and you mentioned it, what he did at BYU, there's no reason why this team can't have similar numbers and do similar things and be even better or at least just as good as what that BYU team was this season. Obviously, everybody wants the results in the NCAA tournament to be different. That's a random thing. Like we know, matchup based. You play poorly one game, you're done. So to me, when I look at this, I see a roster with him now in the mix. I don't like we talked about win-loss predictions and stuff the other night, and I had it 24-9 going into the NCAA tournament. I talked to somebody else, and they had it 25-8. And we hadn't even talked about what I said on the show. He doesn't add wins to me. Like, I'm not going to change that to 26 just because Jaxson Robinson's here. I just have a little bit more confidence in them getting some of those games, especially early, because he's in the mix. And I know a lot of people talked about the other night, I saw in the comments and things about me saying that he might not be Kentucky's best player. That's okay. Like if he doesn't become Kentucky's best player and somebody plays better than him, great. But early on, he's going to probably have the most confidence entering because he's played in this. He's played for Pope. I think he's going to be the most secure those first few weeks of the season. But let's say that somebody else comes along, Jack, and they get 2 or 3 that's of equal to him and his production a year ago, then you're starting to talk about something when it gets into postseason basketball. That's what I was trying to get at, that there doesn't really necessarily have to be a stud on this team because the team and the system in itself is going to be the strength of
it. And I think the perfect example of that is the Duquesne game. Everybody else besides Jaxson Robinson in that matchup went 14 of 42 overall, 33% shooting. Jaxson himself went for 25 on 8 of 15 shooting, 5 of 11 from 3. Jaxson was the only reason why BYU was even remotely in that. It was a great game plan by Duquesne. Shots were not falling for BYU. So when the system isn't working because the guys you have on the outside just aren't making shots, you need somebody that can just kind of elevate you and say and give you a chance. That's what Jaxson does. That I think that the semantics of, do you need the dude? Do you need a star? No. In a vacuum, Mark Pope does not need a superstar to thrive offensively, to make his things tick, to make things go. That's not how he operates. This is we do have to rewire our brains into thinking that the way we thought guys got shots and buckets under John Calipari are the same under Pope. It's not going to be the case. But if Mark Pope's offense was perfect, they would have gone undefeated last year. If everything worked as he hoped in his mind, and there was no answer for opposing defenses, then Mark Pope is probably the Kentucky coach 5 years ago instead of now. So it's a process. There's give and take and nuance with all of this. It will elevate everybody else. Pope's offense will elevate the it's the ultimate safety net, and it'll raises the floor, but you also need a ceiling raiser as well. That is kind of where we are, where you can probably still be comfortably saying it's a 23, 24, 25-ish win team in the SEC with a chance to go to the, win the SEC tournament, go to the Sweet 16 or beyond. But Jaxson Robinson could potentially be the difference in the Sweet 16 and Elite 8, or the Elite 8 and the Final Four. I do think that he has that possibility.
That's where the game differential would come into play. Like if you want to add a game or two, then it doesn't necessarily have to be the overall win total. It just has to be in the moment. And when you get into that tournament where it's about the single moment that you were in, it's not about the previous 24, 25 games that you won. It's about that one that you're trying to win just to keep your season alive. He's a guy that has been in that tournament. He's put up big numbers in that tournament. Yes, they didn't win, but that doesn't mean that the second time around that he doesn't come through and score 25 and a win at Kentucky. So it also, when we're talking tiers here, and I know I don't want to get repetitive on what we're talking about, but now that we've got this thing set and we see 12 guys, and obviously there's still a spot available that we'll get into. When I look at this, though, the thing for Kentucky to be good, Jack, to me, is majority of this roster has to meet expectations. It's not possible for all 12 guys on this roster to meet expectations. That is not how any sport works. We know that. There are going to be some guys in this one season that are not going to get to maybe the expectation of what we thought they were going to be. There will always be some that go beyond, and there will always be some that come short. How many of them meet it, though? If majority of this roster meets it and one or two exceed it, I think this is a team that on paper can win some games and get to that second weekend. That's the benchmark that I'm putting on this year one at Kentucky. Get to that second weekend in the NCAA tournament, and then what happens when you get there? Like, that's what I want to see for Mark Pope. I'm not ready to put this team in Final Four predictions or win a national championship year one. I just think that's unrealistic expectations for a roster that was gutted top to bottom. But what he's put on paper now and the system itself, I think, is going to produce a lot of success. That if you can get to that second weekend, Jack, it doesn't mean that you can't get to a Final Four. Like, you get into that environment, it's about scouting. It's about taking advantages. It's about game planning. It's about individual matchups. Who is your individual matchup? We know how random that tournament postseason is. You get in that setting, Mark Pope is going to mix things up. He's never going to just sit in one thing. He's going to mix up his defense. He's going to scheme up things offensively and take advantage of what defenses give him. He's going to run it in transition. They're going to take threes. They're going to hit free throws. They're going to do all these things, but he's going to manage games that's going to give his roster a chance to win every single night they take the floor, whether that be against superior talent or of equal talent. Like, I think this is a guy that's going to be able to coach them up. If you do that in a Sweet 16, maybe you get to an Elite Eight in year one. But to me, I'd love for this program to make the second weekend. There's going to be people that are going to troll in the comments and be like, well, Kentucky basketball's talking about it being a winning season if you get to the Sweet 16. It's a program that you're still wanting to build and move forward, and I think that's a great year one if that's what happens.
And I think people just get so caught up in the history and the expectation under Cal and how toxic it got to where it truly did become Final Four or bust. And that's what we expect. That's what we demand. Like, that's, I appreciate that Mark Pope has made it abundantly clear that it will be a failure if Kentucky doesn't win a championship. I think it's a little hyperbolic on his end that nobody is truly at their heart of hearts expecting him to win number 9 in year one. We'd love it, and it could not have gone any better if that ends up being the case. But when you look at the foundation, he took the job 7 weeks ago today, Sean. 7 weeks ago today. And since that time, it was already a late coaching change, the carousel. It wasn't an early mid-March deal. This was early April. Then he took the job. Then he had to build out a coaching staff. Then he had to build out a 12-man roster. So to do that in 5-ish weeks, 5+ weeks, unbelievable. He was already a step behind or two just for the circumstances, the timing. Nobody in college basketball has their entire roster gutted going into a new job. Look at BYU. BYU is a great example with Kevin Young. They were able to retain some really nice core pieces from last season to where you can kind of swing for the fences on some international talent. You can offer an absolute ridiculous bag to Jaxson Robinson and say, hey, I know I'm new to you, bud, but we got a cool system and I got money. So do you want to come be a part of this or not? And it makes you go, well, maybe that is something I consider. And if it's not Jaxson, it's going to be somebody else. And if it's not that person, it's the next person. Other schools have at least some type of foundation. New coaches have some type of foundation when they take new jobs. Mark Pope had to start from absolute ground zero. And for him to come as far as he did to where we can even dream of Final Fours, that's a damn cool thing that Mark Pope has been able to accomplish in 7 weeks. 5+ given, the first Amari Williams edition through today with Jaxson Robinson. He could not have crushed this offseason anymore. We still have one more roster spot, just, whatever they want to do. You've allowed yourself that creativity and flexibility by knocking out everything. There's not a single hole on this roster that you go into a season saying, I like the talent, but there's no depth. I like the scoring, but there's not shooting. I like the defense, but the offense is going to be a disaster. I like the offense, but the defense is going to be we kind of knew what we were working with going into last season, and ended up being the year's failure, the defense. There is nothing that we can go to that we say Pope missed on this. He got everything. Now it's just about what that turns into with wins. And I think that's part of it is going to be luck. Part of it is going to be finding his footing as a high major, coach in the SEC, the expectation, pressure, and all that stuff. It'll take a minute to find his footing from an X's and O in-game coaching, day by day coaching standpoint. But the offseason could not have gone any better given all of the circumstances going in, Sean.
No, you're absolutely right on all those things. And one thing that kind of came to my mind there when you were talking early on about expectations in this program being national championship or bust, that's always going to be the case. But the difference to me is under John Calipari, and this is college basketball, but I don't think it's as extreme as what it was with Cal. Every single year, it was like a 1-year contract. Every single thing was when it come to a roster, because you knew that all of it went into that one individual season. And if it didn't pan out, you were starting over 80% or more of your roster. So now you're in a position as a program. Listen, no one was starting over more the last 15 years than what Kentucky did. It truly was, whatever happened and whatever the loss was in the NCAA tournament, there was this sense of, you had some security in recruiting classes, but in the back half of this and the portal era, there was a lot of anxiety and concern about it because you're just like, are we good enough to win one now? Like, are we good enough? Like, do we have enough coming back? Duke was bringing dudes back that could have gone on and got drafted in the top 15, top 20. Kentucky was sending guys out that weren't even getting drafted.
Mm-hmm.
And look at Kansas. Hunter Dickinson coming back again, 24 years old. He's going to be 24 years old in the heart of the college basketball.
You could have told me any number. You could have told me any number there, and I would have believed it. He's 28 years old. Yeah, that probably makes sense.
And here's the thing, like, that wasn't happening in Lexington. You weren't getting that. You were getting gutted every single year, regardless of how good the season was or what the talent was on the roster. There were guys that had no business entering the draft that were entering it and done and not even playing in the NBA. I feel like now you're to a point to where if you do get to a Sweet 16, and yes, there are super seniors all over this roster, you're going to have some work to do going into next year. But I feel like there's an approach here that is – you can have an approach, but if the side that's setting the standard for it in the game plan and the blueprint, if they're not really pushing it, then you're not going to get it. And I feel like that this staff is strategically sitting down and looking at putting rosters together, thinking, okay, we have to be able to retain something. Even in an era where you can get just obliterated from the portal and gutted from the draft and everything else, you've got to be able to have some continuity and consistency. What is the best way to do that at a program like Kentucky? And I feel like they're targeting that. You've got 2 in-state kids in this class that are willing to be a part of this program as long as they feel like they have a role or a place. And I think that's a really good starting point for a first recruiting class, especially one that just had Travis Perry when he walked in. You've got that. You're starting to target some developmental pieces. What do they do with this last scholarship? Is that a route that they take with it? So that to me means if you go to a Sweet 16 in year one, I can stomach it a lot better because I see something here that you can retain some guys. And then you go into next season knowing, okay, I've got 4 or 5 familiar faces that have played, or I see something instead of just getting gutted over and over and over again. And then you're restarting the journey knowing you've got to win a national championship, but it's in a 1-year contract window. I don't feel like it's in a 1-year contract window anymore with this program. Now, the results have to back it up, but I think the approach is there.
And that's something that, talking to people around the program and getting kind of just the layout of what things will be looking like moving forward, that was a big point of emphasis for them was Jaxson Robinson would be our 7th super senior. That's going to be awesome. But that's also 7 guys we have to replace next year. So there was such a focus on Travis Perry. You can guarantee is going to be there for, well, we said this about Reed as well. But in an ideal world, when you sign him, you are operating under the assumption that he's going to be a multi-year guy for 4 years if possible. And if not, then something went really, really, really right. So you have multi-year Travis Perry, multi-year Otega Owe. You going to be a junior, 2 years of eligibility, and now I think we're wrapping up the COVID year, so I think we're just down to kids with 4, so 2 years left of eligibility there. Trent Noah, hopefully you get him for 3-4 years. Brandon Garrison, 3 more years of eligibility. Colin Chandler, 4 years of eligibility. So yes, you're losing Ainsley Olmanor, Kobe Brea, Lamont Butler, Andrew Carr, Kirk Risa, Amari Williams, and Jaxson Robinson next season, but you have at least that core group of 4 or 5 going into next season where you can realistically expect them to come back, then add maybe another second-year guy like an Otega Owe. Next year, you don't have to go all in with super seniors every year. It worked out that way, but there's at least that foundation, as you said, Sean, set moving forward where you can buy into a future of Trent Noah, Travis Perry, Otega Owe, and Brandon Garrison. Like there's at least some, Colin Chandler. There's at least something there to hang on to. Whereas you said last year, I mean, year after year after year, you just never knew what was coming the following season. And there was a very, very good chance that it was a complete hard reset. Cal made that the norm, but it's, not the norm in college basketball anymore. It's you have to have a foundation set, especially in the transfer portal era where you can just lose guys on a whim. You got to have some core guys that you can feel confident are going to stick. So they're in a really good spot. I love love the 12-man group. Sean, there's one more to go though. We talked on our midnight edition the other night that Jamie Vincent of Oak Hill is very unlikely to be that person. They talked. It was kind of a mutual understanding of it's going to be a redshirt plan. It's going to be a 5-year plan. As we talked about, we need some foundational pieces. Do you want to be a part of that? Well, I have other schools that are telling me I can play right away. May not be Kentucky, but it's Rutgers. It's, some of these still maybe high majors, but not to the level of Kentucky. They're offering me immediate playing time. I think I care more about that. Okay, sounds good. If you want to change your mind, let's circle back later, but let's just kind of mutually hit pause right now. That's where things stand there. Where does, now that you have your total foundation set, you have all of the immediate needs taken care of right now, what do you do if you're Pope with that last spot? You got to fill it. Pope already said he's going to fill it. Cody Feger said he's already going to fill it publicly. What do you do now if you are in their shoes? Do you go for an international route guy? Do you take a chance on a reclass? Do you still say, Will Riley, you're visiting June 4th? Why the hell not? How would you go about pursuing that last spot?
I mean, obviously, I think you start with Will Riley there. That's kind of a recency thing here coming up. That if that's the route that you go, Jack, I think then that's a good approach. But there's no pressure in this spot. Now that you've got what you want, you've got your rotation. You kind of just look at this and maybe you kind of sit on it for a little bit and then maybe figure out what you want to do with it. Is it something that you add later in the summer? Is it something you add going into that fall semester in August? Is it maybe something you hold on and get a mid-year guy a year from now? I mean, those are all things that you do. But the more important side of this is the name there on the screen. You got Jaxson Robinson, so you're not having to scramble to get a 12th. That now there's some, I guess, peace and quiet in trying to find 13. That maybe it doesn't impact this season as much as it does the things that we just talked about. I had one more note, though, on the roster, and we were talking super seniors, and you mentioned all the guys. I don't think that's going to be the case moving forward with so many super seniors, but it was the best ticket to win immediately. That's Absolutely. What Mark Pope will do. He's at Kentucky. Nobody's going to accept we're going to build. Nobody that's listening to this show is going to say this is a rebuild. And if they say it, they've stopped being a Kentucky fan. There's the realistic approach of knowing this is different and you're still optimistic of what it can be. Nobody's calling it a rebuild. This is you're at Kentucky, you got to win and you got to put your team in the best position to do that. I think Mark Pope has done that with so many super seniors. Now, you mentioned those other 5 names that have some eligibility coming back. That's where I'm getting the balance. You got names that come back, and now next year maybe there's not 7 super seniors, maybe there's a couple. I don't know. I don't know what it looks like a year from now, but you're going to have more incoming high school talent. I think on the top end of those classes, that there's going to be a better balance when it comes to it. But with this final spot, Jack, I just don't think that there's any pressure to have to do it now. That there's a little bit of comfort in knowing that you've got what you want for this season. Now it's kind of about, let's see what happens with Riley. After you get through that, then we kind of move into that other tier of maybe what we want to do with it. Is it a reclass? Is it international? Whatever it is. But I'm confident Mark Pope and them will add to their program. It'll be somebody that maybe necessarily doesn't make an impact now, but can make it long term.
My one caveat, something that I want fans to keep in mind as they say, let's just go get Will Riley. Let's just go get the next big Z that pops up in August. Let's go, swing for the fences on Coleman Hawkins or somebody of that magnitude. I'm not saying it's ruled out, but they feel they are in such a good spot right now that they do not want to throw that one ingredient in that explodes the whole pot. They do not want, they feel that this team right now can contend for a national championship. They do not feel that they need to go add another superstar to elevate to champion, they would take one if the circumstances were correct. Will Riley would be a take if there was an understanding of what the role was going to be. Like, they wouldn't add one kid knowing that you're going to piss off 3 or 4 others. That's not going to be the case. They're not going to get a guy that is demanding some superstar role that is going to come in and, really shake up the locker room. It's such a delicate thing because you'll never keep 13 guys happy in a locker room. That's just the way 13 personalities works, and different guys making different money, different shots and minutes and all that. Every roster has some type of discontent, but you can't actively explode it. You can't go out of your way to add a hothead, big personality, shot driven, touch driven, minute driven guy who could really shake things up. So that's why they are going to be just so delicate. And that's why they, went into that Jamie Vincent conversation and said, you're not going to be playing. I hope you're okay with that. If you are, then let's sign on the dotted line. He said that probably wouldn't be a situation that worked. So he said, no, let's pass. So that's the only thing to keep in mind as we move forward, that if they do swing big, it's going to be because they feel really, really good about his personality and meshing with the other guys. But do not be surprised if it is just a solely personality-driven decision, where it is a project, where it is a multi-year international piece that is going to be here for 2-3 years, not expecting to play immediately. They're going to be very, very delicate. And you have the flexibility in that. You have the comfort of doing that because you hit home runs all the way up to this point. You don't need to keep swinging for the fences if necessary. You can if you want to, but you don't have to.
Yep. That's the important part of that to me, is you don't want to do something here that really disrupts or runs out somebody that you've brought into the fold. Like, you don't want to have to go re-recruit or refill. So that's the takeaway for me when it comes to this final spot, is you want to be everything about this roster has been strategic, from a stylistic standpoint to a role to this guy's got this much time available. This guy's a super senior. This is what we need at point guard. All of it's been strategically pieced together. This final spot will fit into it as well. This isn't going to be something we're trying to squeeze in here. This is going to be something that just fits the other 12 and what you want to do, whether that be impactful now, impactful a year from now, or possibly even impactful for 2 years from now. I think it'll be strategically done.
Yeah, and you just sent me the NCAA has granted an additional year of eligibility to all D1 student athletes who were ruled ineligible to compete for any part of a season during or since the 2019-20 academic year. So still a few. There will still be some hangovers, but I think that the specifics of the ruled ineligible is going to be a tricky thing to navigate, where if there is a fifth-year guy that's, out there, and there's going to be grad seniors. I mean, that's still going to be a thing that was well before Pope arrived, and it's going to continue moving forward. So that's also something to keep in mind.
We're getting close, though, to that era of the COVID stuff kind of starting to play its way out. Like, it's on the back half of it now, where you've got guys that are just so much older. Now, I still think getting old and staying old in college basketball is going to be the model to follow, but you're not going to be able to get ancient. That's the difference. Like, you're not going out here and being 25, 26 years old, or however old that they are. So I think that's going to be the difference now, is you're not going to have guys playing. I mean, Jamal Baker played how many years of college basketball?
Is he not? Is he still playing? I did get a job.
Like, at that point, like if I've not made it professionally in basketball, I'm probably done. So, and there's plenty of examples like that around the country, not just Jamal Baker. Like, there's plenty of examples of guys that have played a lot of basketball at a lot of different stops. So we're almost to that kind of being cycled out and things, but the changes that happened to the game ever since this show, me and you have been recording this show together since right before COVID. The changes that have happened in not only this sport, but college athletics in general, man, it's been crazy to navigate. And we're still trying to navigate things that are being done. But here we are. This is the best way to put rosters together. I think Mark Pope has done an excellent job with his staff of piecing this together, but also generating some excitement with it too, with being transparent and stuff on social media, like with the coaching staff and Fieger putting out the booms and things like that. Like that's a cool thing that football had its Yahtzees and has its Yahtzees. Kentucky basketball has its thing now, and that's kind of its identity and its own stamp on what makes Kentucky basketball something the fans can relate to and connect with when it comes to recruiting. I think that's been one of the coolest things that's happened in the last 5 weeks.
I am here to inform you that Jamal Baker has come to an end. He fought the good fight, 7 years of eligibility, 1 redshirt year, 1 COVID year, 1 medical redshirt year. His time in college basketball has come to an end. So long, soldier. God,
1 year
this is
one year for each rep. I could bench press Pat Kelsey. So, no.
Dude, 7 years is a long freaking time.
I'd be a little upset if I only bench press Pat Kelsey that many times, though. Now that I think about it, that's not a whole lot of weight.
Yeah, I got like a 1.75 in me of Pat Kelsey's. All right, well, before this thing gets too ridiculous and off the rails, 2 weeks from today we'll be hosting Kentucky Sports Radio. So let us know if there's any wacky topics you want to get to, any questions that you want broadcast into the ultra airwaves. Make sure you call in that week. We want some guys that are part of this show, some people that are regular listeners and follow along in the chat and all those. We want you guys to call in. You get your voice heard, be on the air with us, ask some great questions. We're very excited. We'll get into the real nuts and bolts of the roster, the rotations, who we're expecting to emerge, maybe surprise standouts, guys who could be maybe not, who needs to live up to that standard that you were talking about and live up to those expectations, who will surpass them, who maybe we shouldn't be buying as much stock in. We'll talk about all of that stuff and more. Are you excited about hosting KSR again for a 3rd consecutive year?
I am excited about it. This is something that around May, you start talking about like wonder when our date's going to be and when we're going to get it. And no, I'm very appreciative of Matt continuing to include us in what is a talented lineup of guest hosts to get through the summer.
Awesome.
Like that graphic really was cool to see sources say on there with some of those names and personalities that are getting to host. And look, it's a great connection to the fan base daily. And those listeners are loyal. And we want to make sure that we live up to the standard of what, KSR is from 10 to 12. And I've had a lot of fun the last 2 times we've done it, but I'm looking forward to the 3rd. Every time we get to do it, it's a blast together.
In the day after we do our show, will be the Club Blue, event that the meet and greet for the first time to meet Mark Pope, to meet the assistant coaches, to meet the roster. That is going to be a huge, huge, huge event. If you have not subscribed to that, make sure you do. The deadline's already passed to get to this event, but the guys that we're talking about, Jaxson Robinson would not be a Kentucky Wildcat if it were not for Club Blue. If fans didn't actively participate and subscribe and join in on those NIL efforts, none of this would be possible. So continue to do that so we can continue to talk about guys like Jaxson Robinson and the next star to come through, AJ DeBonsa. Maybe that's going to be the difference. We talked on our late night show what the NIL number would be for a college superstar like AJ DeBonsa. Why don't we be the reasons that number gets shifted up and can really set a historic number in that regard, because that's a kid that deserves it, and it can't be possible without the fans. So make sure you do that. We're excited to preview that. We'll try to have on a pretty cool guest. If you have any suggestions for a player or a coach or somebody that you would like to have on, we're working on having Mark Pope on this show very, very soon. We're on the docket. We're on the list. So whenever our name pops up, we will have the one and only. We'll be having the head coach of the University of Kentucky basketball team on this show. Never been done before. Very, very cool opportunity. We're very excited for that. But any other cool guests that you guys have in mind, make sure you let us know on Twitter. Let us know in the chat. We'll be following along. Very, very excited. Very, very grateful. Sean, let's wrap this thing up. Or any last second thoughts or things you want to get off your chest before we get out of here?
We had talked about how we were going to record it too, like where we were going to record and things like that, which we'll get into as well and stuff over the next week or so. Jack, maybe figure out what the plan is that day. But last year we were in a hotel room.
My plan,
Jam, so
my plan is to be at KS Bar, where fans can be there and tune in and kind of make it a live Sources Say experience. We don't get to do that often. We've been in really tough situations where we go to Pittsburgh, we go to Nashville, we go to different things, and we usually plan on having a live show the next day, but they keep losing the first game, so we have to leave the next day and record our breakdown what the hell happened show at home, sadly. So we would love to kind of ramp up the in-person live stuff, because it makes my day to see people out in public and have them recognize us from the show and say, hey, we watch every single one of your shows. Thank you for what you guys do. Those things, that makes this stuff 100 times more enjoyable. It makes it feel like people are paying attention and enjoying and soaking this stuff in. So we would like that to be an opportunity. By the way, I didn't even get to mention this. There's an Amazon driver 2 days ago that knocked on the door to drop a package off, and I opened up the door, and he was like, okay, cool, sounds good, see ya. And he took 3 more steps and turned around, and he said, what the hell? Is that Jack Pilgrim? And it was like stuff like this, and having to be able to put our face out there and have different show opportunities, live things. That's how we are, that's kind of what keeps us going and makes all this stuff worthwhile. So thank you for all of your support. We would love for the KSR show to be another example of that, being out there with the fans.
Yeah. I mean, I was getting my driver's license renewed in April, and I sit down, and I had already been in there once, but there was something that happened with my mailing or with my address or something. So I had to go back in, and I had on a Frederick Douglass hoodie. And the lady goes, wait, I thought I knew your face. I thought I knew your name. My husband we watch you all the time on Sources.
You're that superstar coach from Frederick Douglass.
No, I think it was the hoodie. I think it was the FD logo that. Nah, but I get that all the time, or I'll be at work and somebody will say, oh, my husband watches you on YouTube. The funniest one was actually, I hope he's listening, he beat me in that game too to go to the Final Four my last year at Livesey. But I was coaching against someone, and he comes over, and this is like South Tennessee, like near Chattanooga. And he's like, man, I love Sources Say. But, man, he beat me to go to the Final Four. So, bragging rights against me for sure. But I just thought it was cool to see the reach of our show, that it's not just in Kentucky though. It's all over the place. There's listeners from all over that listen to Sources Say. But I think getting on YouTube and getting our face out here and kind of being this interaction, there's still people that listen to just the audio. But I think it's cool that this is kind of a connection to us, that we can get active in the chat and things like that. So it's really cool to see where the show's going and continues to go.
Yep, absolutely. So let's keep that moving forward. June 14th, the KSR Sources Say takeover. We are very excited. Thank you to Matt for letting that happen for us. But until then, we got to get out of here. Sean, where can fans find your work?
You can follow me at _Coach S. Smith on social media.
Find me on Twitter as well, at Jack Pilgrim KSR. Go subscribe to KS Board. Absolute blast. All the intel, the ins and outs of the Jaxson Robinson decision, how we got here, what's next, all that comes on KS Board first before it comes on these airwaves. So make sure you do that. Subscribe to this platform. There are a whole lot of you that just tune in week by week, and just by searching us, see us on Twitter, click on that. But make sure you subscribe. It gets automatically sent to your phone. You know exactly when and where we are going live. So make sure you do that. But thank you to each and every single one of you.